It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it, a slow, rhythmic breathing, steady and close, coming right from the wall next to my bed. At first, I thought I must have been dreaming, or maybe the sound was coming from outside, muffled through the window. But the weather was calm, and no cars passed by. It was coming from inside the wall, the plaster just beyond my bedroom. I wanted to convince myself it was nothing. Old pipes breathing. A vent rattling. But deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. Our apartment building was old. The kind where you can hear neighbors shifting on the other side of the walls if you listen hard enough. I never minded it before. No one ever complained. But this night, the noise was different, like someone was focused on me, breathing slower and more deliberately. At first I lay frozen, trying to make sense of it. It seemed impossible. Who could be inside the wall? The next morning, I inspected the room. I tapped around the wall with my knuckles. The plaster was cold and solid, no loose panels, no cracks visible. I even checked the vents but found nothing out of place. My neighbors didn't hear anything. I called the building manager, who promised to send someone to check the walls and pipes, just to be sure. That day passed in a haze. I kept thinking about it, thinking maybe I was overreacting. After all, it was just one night. But when night came again, the sound was back. Not just breath but faint scratching behind the wall. Slow, precise, almost like nails running lightly over wood or drywall. I tried to tell myself it was a rat or a squirrel stuck somewhere, but the feeling settled in my chest, the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not really. The scratching continued every night. I started leaving my bedroom light on, even though it made it impossible to sleep. The sound sometimes shifted, coming from different directions, beneath the floorboards, above the ceiling, from the walls in the living room. One night I even heard the faint click of something metallic, like a latch turning or a door closing, but no doors led into those walls. I began to imagine a hidden space, a crawlspace, or a forgotten closet. I checked my neighbors again, mentioning the sounds. Everyone shrugged it off. Some joked about ghosts, and others said maybe it was just the building settling with the night chill. But deep down, I knew this was different. Some nights, it felt like breath was right next to my face. That small blast of hot air. The weight of eyes watching me from within the shadows of the wall. I never told anyone else. I couldn't. It felt too impossible, too unreal and deeply unsettling. That night, as the scratching grew louder and deeper, I pressed my ear harder against the plaster and caught the faintest whisper of a word. I couldn't make it out clearly. Maybe I imagined it. But it was enough to pull me into a sleepless terror. The cold wall pressed against my skin, and I wondered, was there really someone inside? Someone who had been there all along. The noise faded, leaving a silence so thick it pressed on my temples. I lay back, heart racing, wondering if the breath would return. It did, slow, steady, unmistakable. Someone living in the walls at night. Days went by in a blur of exhaustion and unease. The scratches, the breathing, the noises, they all seemed to grow bolder. I started recording the sounds on my phone. The recordings caught faint scratching, almost deliberate tapping at times. Once, I heard the slow creak of old floorboards from the hallway outside my apartment. When I opened the door to check, the hallway was deserted, lit only by flickering fluorescent lights. I called the landlord again, explaining the situation more urgently. He sent a maintenance man named Mr. Jacobs, an older guy who didn't seem surprised by my complaint. Maybe he'd heard similar stories before. He recommended checking inside the wall via the heating ducts and promised to examine the baseboards. The moment Mr. Jacobs started poking around, though, the oddness deepened. As he pried off a baseboard in my living room, we both heard a muffled crunch inside the wall cavity. It was faint but unmistakable, as if someone was shifting or creeping silently behind the plaster. Mr. Jacobs froze for a second, looking at me with narrowed eyes. Then he shrugged it off, saying it was probably just rats. Still, he agreed to bring a trap next time. Late that night, I sat on the couch staring at the wall where the baseboard had been removed. I imagined a tiny human hiding in there. Could someone actually live unseen? I know it sounds mad. But there were signs, small scraps of lint I'd found wedged into tiny cracks, faint stains on the wall paint that looked like hand smudges, and almost daily scratches that would shift between rooms. One afternoon, I met a neighbor in the stairwell. She was an elderly woman who mentioned that the previous tenant on my floor had mysteriously vanished a few years ago. No one had heard from him again. I wondered, could this be connected? Maybe he was trying to hide, or worse, maybe someone else was hiding now. The noises started moving further. From the walls they slipped into the ventilation shafts and the crawlspace under the apartment. Booms and thumps echoed through the thin floorboards. One night, my bedroom door, which I always keep closed, was found slightly ajar when I woke up. I could swear it hadn't been when I fell asleep. I didn't want to tell anyone else for fear they'd think I was crazy. But the feeling of being watched kept growing. I tried to install security cameras inside the apartment, pointed at the wall. The footage only caught shadows and flickers, nothing solid. Yet at night, my phone would ring once or twice with no calls on the other end. The strange feeling that someone was observing me when I was most vulnerable, asleep in my bed, felt suffocating. One night, the scratching stopped. A silence as complete as the grave settled. Then, just as I was about to relax, a faint cough echoed softly through the wall. It was unmistakably human. I pressed my ear close, and there it was again, a single cough, deliberate and dry. And a whisper, clearer this time, saying something just beyond understanding. I remember sitting back, blinking hard, unsure if I heard right. The room felt unbearably still. The air was thick. I wasn't sure whether to call the police or run from the apartment altogether. The idea of a man, living unseen, just inches away from me, completely hidden in the walls, it was impossible and terrifying all at once. The next morning, I found a small twisted scrap of cloth wedged behind the baseboard in the living room. It had a faint smell of sweat and old tobacco. I touched it lightly and suddenly the cold awareness hit me. This wasn't just someone hiding temporarily. They had been here a long time. Longer than I wanted to imagine. At this point, I was exhausted and unraveling. Every night the sounds drew closer. I started hearing footsteps pacing behind the walls, slow and deliberate, like a man tracing the perimeter of his hidden domain. Once, I heard scraping metal and a faint click. I swear it was a lock being turned, or maybe a rusty cabinet door opening. I devised a plan to catch whoever, or whatever, it was. I set up motion sensors around the walls and sprinkled powder near cracks, hoping to catch footprints or signs of passage. The sensors never triggered anything visible, and the powder remained untouched. The man inside the walls was paranoid, or maybe he was just careful. I began spending more time inspecting every inch of the apartment. The vents, the crawlspaces, and old utility tunnels. One afternoon, while poking around the rarely used storage closet, I found a patch of wall that sounded hollow when I knocked. Heart pounding, I pushed on the panel. It moved slightly, like a door concealed beneath paint and wallpaper. I knocked again, louder this time. Faint tapping returned. I called the landlord one last time, demanding he open the panel and inspect thoroughly. He hesitated but agreed, sending the maintenance man with a crowbar and flashlight. The panel creaked open, revealing a narrow crawlspace, surprisingly clean but cramped. Empty except for a thin dusty blanket and a small rusted metal box. No footprints, no signs of recent movement, but still. The unmistakable smell of human sweat lingered there. Then we heard it, a soft groan from deep inside the crawlspace. We shone our flashlights in every corner but found no one. The air felt colder, heavier. At the far end, a small ventilation grate seemed recently disturbed, loose screws on the floor beneath it. I braced myself, the thought of what might be behind that grate was unbearable. But the landlord refused to pry further without police. I called the police myself the next day. Officers carefully tore open the grate and found a narrow passage, too small for most adults but big enough. They followed it a short distance and then discovered a tiny hidden room just behind the wall. Inside was nothing but a sleeping mat, some cans of food, a rusted spoon, and old newspapers from years past. Evidence someone had lived here, hidden from the world. They left after promising to search the building thoroughly. But no one was found. No sign of the man. The police said it was probably squatters or a homeless person who had since vanished. But I know better. Late at night, when the world is quiet and the lights are low, I still hear breathing. Soft, measured, just behind my bedroom wall. The feeling of being watched never leaves. Sometimes I swear I catch a shadow moving beneath the cracked plaster. I've moved since then, but the memory clings like a second skin. I'll never know if he was there all those years, trapped or choosing to stay. Or if he's still there now. A man living inside the walls at night, hidden in the spaces we never think to look. I don't want to know the full truth. But some nights, I press my ear to the wall and listen. The breath is always there. Always watching. After the crawlspace discovery, something about my apartment felt permanently altered, as if the air itself carried a new weight, unseen, unshiftable. The police came, poked around, nodded gravely. They found little to hold on to, a patch of dust disturbed, a rusted nail bent out of shape in the hidden room's floorboards, but no fingerprints, no sign of recent use. And just like that, the room was sealed off, walls patched like wounds that should never have opened. They declared the apartment safe, but I knew better. Safe was the word you use when you've given up trying to understand. At first, I told myself the sounds were echoes of my imagination. It was natural, maybe, old pipes groaning in the freeze of early morning, or rats scurrying somewhere beyond my notice. But the breathing was different. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't the ordinary resounding hum of city life slipping through thin walls. It was unmistakably human. Slow. Steady. Sometimes shallow, like someone holding back. Other times, unbearably close, as if a man leaned right into the plaster just to breathe. The night stretched long, with quiet moments punctuated by sudden reminders. I'd wake up sensing movement, or a faint creak just behind the wall my head rested against. One night, I swear I heard the wall tap, tap, twice, like fingers drumming a secret rhythm. But when I ran my hand over the surface, the plaster was cold, solid and unyielding. No hole, no crack, just the weight of skin and paint. I tried to lean on logic. Maybe a nest of pigeons in the vents, or a neighbor practicing a strange tapping code through shared pipes. I asked around, mentioning the strange noises to the building manager. He laughed it off, muttering something about an old building needing constant repairs, admitting they struggled to keep up with the rising maintenance requests. I considered asking the neighbors directly, but it felt like trespassing into their lives, and maybe, by some twisted chance, I feared they'd say they hadn't heard a thing. Maybe I was alone on this. My sleep grew thin and patchworked. I began to notice subtle signs around the apartment, small disturbances in the dust on the bookshelf, a faint scrape on the molding where my footsteps never reached. One afternoon, I found a small, twisted piece of wire tucked behind the baseboard of the kitchen. It wasn't mine. Or if it was, I didn't remember dropping it there. I tucked it into a drawer, heart thundering, unsure if it was evidence or just a last tether to denial. Packing up to leave was torturously slow. I kept lingering in rooms like I was waiting for something to appear. Every shadow felt like it stretched too long, every breeze whispered invitation or warning. I caught myself listening as I folded clothes, the silence broken only by the faintest inhaling, steady, barely perceptible, through the walls. The night before I moved, I lay awake in bed, the moonlight casting long fingers across the floor. I felt a pressure in the wall near my ear, a presence quivering in the paint and plaster. I pressed my ear to the cold surface and heard the breath, soft, deliberate, slow, a man's breathing, barely louder than a dream. Then I saw it. Somewhere beneath the cracked plaster, a small, dark rectangular shadow slid briefly across my vision like a secret door opening. It was a movement so slight it might have been a trick of light, but I knew better. My eyes focused hard on that spot, but the shadow vanished as if it had never been. My heart hammered. Not a ghost. Not wind or rat or illusion. Something real and human. This presence, so immaterial yet tangible, was alive beyond the bounds of my understanding. That tiny rectangle of darkness might be a hatch, or a crack in reality where a man had been cloistered in silence for years. I never saw him. Never heard footsteps, never a voice. But the signs, breaths, taps, shifted dust, were there. All the years I thought I was alone. Alone but watched. Sometimes, I wonder if he ever left. Or if he waits still, settled behind that wall like a shadow in a half-remembered dream, breathing quietly beneath the veneer of normal life. A specter not of ghost stories, but of slow, patient waiting. And so I share this. Not to frighten, or provoke panic, but to warn, maybe. To whisper that quiet things are often not so quiet. That walls can carry more than sound. That sometimes, just beyond the paint, someone might still be watching. I don't really know the truth. And maybe it's best to leave it that way.